it in very easily. Fred, I know we gotta go back to some of these, but.
I wasn't expecting that you would close these
No,
up today, especially after I had seen your agenda for the
So that
rest of
was
the
that,
week.
what section was that again? We're good.
I think you probably are done talking about, for now, sections 20 to 23.
Okay, so we just pass over this. So 20, 21, 22, 23, leave that over, what you're saying.
When's this, the report is due next year or not until?
January 30th of 2024, January 31st of 2024. And that goes to the House and Senate Committees on Transportation and your revenue committees.
Okay, so we'll start where, 24?
Yes, and then Mike, I'm waiting to be let in when you get a chance.
Going live again, all right, okay.
Why did we, can I ask a question back? Why did we want to limit how much money an agency can apply for?
So I don't think you need to limit it. That's basically what we felt we would need based on our prior consultants' recommendations, and it may be a little more than we need, but that was what our target is and what we were planning to match. So.
I would just say that you could get more and then you're like, oh, the legislation doesn't require us.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. I mean.
Require a match it though.
We would have to match it, so we have to come up with a match, but if we're matching it at
Yeah.
80-20 or something, then.
I would say, you could change the language to be more, because we're not asking for the whole match this year. You can make sure that for some reason we decide we're going to apply for a little more. We know we ended up having to come back to the rest of the match.
It just seemed weird to,
Yeah.
unless we were really worried about the match, like, oh, don't force us into a match, but.
So you could say, and this would be it where, here, I'll just go back to it.
Yeah.
An amount of approximately.
I mean, or just be silent on it and then be prescriptive in what the authorization for the matches. So you could say, is authorized to apply for and accept a competitive, et cetera, grant, not include in an amount to exceed that in federal money. So you could just say, authorized to apply for and accept a competitive, got federal there, and then say, comma, with up to $350,000 in transportation fund monies authorized in this year. So be entirely silent on.
She says it.
No, because if this says we only have 350,000, that would, that would only be half the match. So I feel like that would restrict us from applying for more than we have matched to provide for.
But since you know it's a multi-year grant and this is the non.
Just for FY24.
Yeah, because it says in fiscal year 24.
If you think that's what that means and we're not gonna get in trouble, then I'm fine with that.
Or we could just raise it to 5 million or something like that, but you use the headroom.
Do you want that?
If we said 5 million, would we have to update, would we have to increase the match, or can we say the match for FY24 is still at 350?
That's leaving the match at 350 for FY24 is fine, and you can increase the top number. I would say we're not anticipating for applying for more than 350, but yeah, maybe we pencil it out and maybe we want to apply for
3.5.
3.6, I don't know. So,
and I think if you are concerned about this making it seem like there isn't an authorization for a match in the future fiscal year, which there isn't, you could say, like, and it is expected that there will be, a future fiscal year match.
I would just say to lose some federal money because of this.
Yeah,
statutory.
that's a good point.
Okay, so not to exceed 5 million? Is that what you
Yeah,
want?
that's like way more headroom than
But
we'll
the
ever need.
350 won't be enough match, will it? But
It's
they
not
can
that
always come
Multiple
back.
year,
Well, we have to come back next year anyways, because the 350 only matches 1 year's or half of the
Is that a
345.
50% match for these kind of grants?
No, these kind are now 80%, and they used to be 50%. So that's the IIJA fixed that for us, so that was good that we waited.
So what are we doing to put the 35,
Including the 3.5 million to 5 million.
5?
So I think what I'm gonna do is say in an amount not to exceed, where you've got the 3.5 million on line 5, would go up to 5 million, and then after in fiscal year 2024, it would then go on to say,
For an amount, the most you could possibly negotiate.
Yeah.
Most you can match.
Right.
I would then say, and a to be determined amount for the non-federal match in fiscal year 2025.
Is there language that would do that, that would
You usually don't mention any kind of cap.
No, we don't. It's very unusual. I think it was driven by the match obligation more than anything.
Yeah. And I think also, we just,
Why not even do it? You shall apply and up to 350 shall be authorized.
We can do that, and then I would say, and a to be determined amount for the non-federal match
Something
in
like
fiscal
that.
year
Let's do
2025.
that.
And get rid of that.
yeah, thank you.
Let's just apply for the grant.
Okay. Authors to apply for an acceptance. With up to 350,000 in transportation fund monies authorized for the non-federal match in fiscal year 2024, and a to be determined amount in transportation fund monies. I will be silent on funding source, and a to be determined amount
Subsequent fiscal year.
for the non-federal match in. And that'll also give flexibility if for some reason the grant allows you to go past July 1 of 2025 to then say there might be match through to your next fiscal year. Okay, I will make that change as well. So I think where we are now is we're saying done with mileage-based user fee for the time being. I'll make these changes and maybe changes based on your testimony tomorrow and Friday. And you'll see those reflected in the next version of your amendment, or the first version of your amendment. Okay, so now we're on section 24, shifting a little bit. So you'll remember in the IIJA, a lot of talk about the carbon reduction program, and the agency is currently going through the process of developing its carbon reduction strategy or carbon reduction plan, I can never remember what it's called, in order to be able to get those federal formula funds under the carbon reduction program that are only available if you have a plan. So this is really in subsection A, fleshing out what it is that the Agency of Transportation needs to be doing in developing its carbon reduction strategy. Subdivision 1 was talking about developing a methodology that can basically measure what's going to be achieved in the transportation program related to a reduction in transportation sector greenhouse gas emissions, a way to measure a gap once you can quantify the reductions that you expect to see between what is anticipated from the transportation program and what is required under the Global Warming Solutions Act as it's codified, and then evaluating what else needs to be done through or could be done through the state's transportation program to close the gap. So how do we measure what will be accomplished? How do we compare that to what needs to be accomplished under Global Warming Solutions Act? And how do we evaluate what can be done to close the gap if there is one? Next requirement in developing the carbon reduction strategy is to figure out a way to articulate the ongoing investments that the agency intends to implement through the transportation program. Subdivision 3 is identifying and evaluating the effectiveness of the others, what else could we be doing to meet the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act, and it needs to include what's covered in A and B. I'm going to highlight A when it's talking about an analysis of potential to generate revenue sources sufficient for ongoing greenhouse gas emissions reduction and implementation. That would be something like TCI or some other regional program, or if you did a fee-bait. And then a recommendations on how you could close the gaps that are identified above. So that's a lot of what the agency is going to need to do to figure out how to measure and quantify. And Michelle can testify as to whether or not this was going to be accomplished under their contract without this language being included.
Well, the heading talks about,
There's a lot more to this section.
oh, okay, because I was just interested in protect formula.
Yep.
program.
Entirely different program,
Yeah, I know.
entirely different set of funds.
What was that preamble that you gave about, the agency has to do this for the federal program?
That's for the carbon reduction program. To get money under the carbon reduction program, they need to, and Michelle can correct me when I get all of this phrased wrong, they need to develop the carbon reduction strategy. And they have retained a contractor who's doing the work that they need to have that carbon reduction strategy to get the carbon reduction.
So then what's all this, so the House just thought they should put in more details on what they need to do, even though there's federal rules on what they need.
I think they're trying to create a nexus of that federal funding opportunity with the carbon reduction legislation that the state.
The feds have said you have to do it anyway.
This is the link
I don't know.
to the Global Warming Solutions Act, which, because the IIJA doesn't know that we have the Global Warming Solutions Act, the requirements of the IIJA sort of happen to align nicely with finding a way
They
to.
do. I guess the way it's articulated though is the heading would be the federal, but the federal's down in number 2 and we're doing the.
Well, the federal is in the carbon reduction strategy as well, but that's looking at how the carbon reduction strategy will meet the Global Warming Solutions Act goals.
I
I'm good.
understand that, but the way it's structured or ordered. is Interesting, I guess.
No. Are you relating to the Protect? The Protect also being a federal program, but maybe that should have been the first item, not the second. I'm not sure.
Well, so the protect is addressed in subsection B.
There you go.
So we haven't gotten to anything related to protect yet.
I guess what we're really trying to do here is take what is available through that federal IIJ funding and use it to advance our already existing statutes related to carbon reduction. And so in the end, I mean, you've got we're starting out with the carbon reduction strategy shell and which is really the global warming solutions as well, I guess it's just the way it's structured in terms of creating the nexus to say that the federal funding will help us advance, but to get the money, we have to have a plan and do this work.
Yeah.
And that part of the plan will be looking at, or part of the strategy will be looking at how this compares to the Global Warming Solutions Act, which might not be required of the carbon reduction strategy, but is a benefit of the work that's being done as part of the carbon reduction
Yeah.
strategy.
I understand, and I think that's inherent in what you're talking about through the development of the state's carbon reduction strategy. But maybe we need a little more context to kind of bring in the connection between the federal and this.
Does the agency need this language? Like, you were gonna probably do this anyway, but this was the House saying, like, trying to be
This
more
is
direct.
the work program. This is the scope of work for the thing we're already doing, that we are halfway through.
Right.
Just saying. And I would say that the original House language that was proposed recommended that in codified law, that where we reference the comprehensive energy plan and within the transportation policy, that we add the carbon, the climate action plan, excuse me. And we were not comfortable adding, like, kind of without additional context that we are going to be receiving through our carbon reduction strategy, we're just adding CAP next to the CEP in the statute, in codified statute. So this was the compromise, that we were going to say we were going to do all these things that we're already doing anyways. And maybe this could be reduced in scale.
And section, so two things to add to that. What was the compromise point, so this is the compromise point from, was language that was included in H 101. That's was identical to the language that you saw in the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill when it came over from the House last year. And they added on the policy change sections in Title 19 that the administration was not supportive of, and you took out in your further proposal of amendment. That language ended up in H 101. Section 24 goes with Section 25 in that, based on this work, the agency needs to provide a lot of information and also a recommendation on how, if at all, Title 19 should be amended. And that's, I think, part of the compromise point in that H 101 and the language you saw in the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill last year just jumped to the, we're amending Title 19. This is saying, do all this work, make a recommendation on how Title 19 should be amended, if at all.
So B.
Oh, sorry, I just want to say one thing. Subdivision 4 has a lot of prescriptive requirements around how much public outreach needs to be done and how. So now you can.
Is the state's resilience improvement plan also required by the federal?
Yes.
That's another thing you have to do anyway.
That's to get the Protect formula program money, right?
Very confusing.
So subsection A is saying that this is,
Right, we have to be careful that we're just not getting into things that they're already doing and then asking them to do things that they can't do yet, as you are trying to flush all this out. I mean, just that's where you gotta be careful.
You didn't propose this, obviously. Or
We-
did you? Or
We worked on a compromise because we were not happy with the language that you did away with last year. Anthea just mentioned that came into the amendment on the DMV miscellaneous bill. And so this was our compromise language. But it is a bit, and I think, I don't know what to say. In terms of
gratuitous.
Maybe
Gratuitous.
that's it.
I'm
I would say that everything that's outlined in section 24 are things that we are already doing. And I'm not sure that it is going to accomplish anything additional beyond what we're doing, because I think everything we're doing is in here.
Does it hinder?
Doesn't hinder us either, no,
Yeah,
it's just extra pages in your language.
Strike it out.
You choose that.
I mean, it's what we did last year. I mean, if this was part of your kind of negotiated compromise with them, and it's not hindering your work, like it's just you're doing what you're doing, and certain legislators
more of a
felt
policy.
good about having it in there. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, the key piece is section 25, where we do this work, we finish it, we've gone through the public process, we've analyzed, the interface between that work and the climate action plan. And then we come back with statutory recommendations, which may or may not be similar to what the House has proposed a number of times already that we haven't been able to agree to. So,
Who's the driving force now?
Well, I would think it's probably coming from advocacy groups when you're talking about a broad group of stakeholders, including Vermont Climate Council, requiring at least 2 public hearings. I would think that must be, some of this must be recommended by conservation groups, or I don't know.
but it's fine to leave it into. It really is not going to impact the work we're doing because we're already covering all these spaces.
But in I went 25, kind of saying 25 too. I mean,
25 would be,
why do we have to have these written summarized reports when you're basically already reporting to us? It's a lot like what the, to me, and please, somebody tell me I'm wrong. a lot like what the auditor had said that you guys should be doing, when the whole time the auditor never took into account that you were already informing us, you were already telling us what, what we needed to know. And so does it really take a detailed written reports, 2 of them, for you to come back and report back what we already know?
Well, this is to amend the statute. So if you don't, that could be pretty short if you're not
Yeah,
saying
this is
nothing
really-
needs to be amended. So
Yeah.
in fact, you would have to do that anyway. It's an error, I guess.
So it doesn't hurt anybody. That's fine. Where are you going to?
So we're on a bus.
I go to Burlington to the bus driver short, I gotta fill it.
No, I want to know before you excuse, where are you going
I'm
specifically?
gonna go see the first lady.
But are you a Democrat?
I'm a very moderate Republican.
He gets invited to.
Bobby did too, because I think the North Country did.
Oh, you went through?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's because
Yeah.
the North Country
And-
students.
I didn't get it.
And you are who, sir?
She's into education and so sometimes Commonwealth funds different educational programs and Bobby just said the only reason he could figure out he was invited because the North Country School is located.
How come you're the county?
Nobody likes me.
Yeah, we even did the
Yeah.
beta tour and then
That's right.
we didn't make a good impression.
The
I
whole
guess.
airport report for you.
Son of a gun.
I might have been invited. Haven't caught up on my emails.
I'm sure that's it.
Okay, I'm sorry, I had to get that in there. I'm not- Yeah, right. I gotta call Joe Biden and ask him why I was. Okay, go right ahead.
So I think you've kind of talked about the gist of sections 24 and 25.
All right, so we've declared a victory and we'll let them go because it's maybe unnecessary language, but some people take comfort from having it specifically articulated.
Would you like on line 14 of page 44 to just drop that first written? Would that be easier for you? The agency of transportation shall provide reports summarizing, and that way you can verbally report to us next year.
Well, the statute recommendation should be. written.
Yeah, so
That's
my
not
recommendation, the only change I would suggest would be that we just provide you our recommendations on January 15th. Otherwise, I don't even know if, like, we will have made decisions with the governor's office as to what T-bill proposals we're going to be putting forth
To get
by
rid of the October date.
October, yeah.
Right, we're not gonna look at
So
it.
oddly enough, that's going back to the prior version of this language where there was not an interim report. So that's already written. Yeah, I will revert it to get rid of the interim report.
I also don't want to create an issue, but that seems a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable.
Right, and when it said provided on.
So you need to read the last, this last sentence. A draft written report shall be provided on October 15th and a final written report.
Strange to talk about.
But it also says shall provide a written reports. And provide a
Haven't
written.
heard that
Yeah,
yet.
this was to account for the fact that there was a late in the game request for the interim report of the House. So I have a version of this that is less clunky.
All right, so we're getting rid of the draft for October and just going with a final written report.
Trying to think about transportation.
This bill, are we gonna talk about anything about bridges and road construction and highways, this bill, or what?
Not until you need another drawbridge, sir.
Jeez.
Okay, so now you are going to talk about in sections, it's arranged, it's gonna go from section 26 through 30. And they're all related to complete streets. In current statute,
Transportation planning statutes, is that planning, are the statutes limited to planning? I'm just looking at the heading on 25. Are we talking about transportation statutes or are there specific,
maybe it should say
Planning.
transportation policy statutes.
something? I just think planning is,
Yeah, I can change that to policy statutes.
sorry to,
No, it's a good, I think it's a more clear way to describe what it is, because there are a number of like statements of policy in 19 VSA chapter 21 or chapter 1.
Oh, here's 26, statement of policy.
That is one of them. This is one of the ones that the H101 amended to include like the complete street, to include the climate action plan. This is just to address the complete streets piece. So the way that your complete streets language is currently laid out is there's a piece in session law from when you passed your complete streets law in 2011. Did I get that right?
That's
In 2011, that's in session law that requires like the maintenance of information about what projects did or didn't incorporate complete streets principles. There's language related to state managed projects in 19 VSA section 10B. And then there's language related to municipal projects in 19 VSA section 3, I want to say it's 308, it's what's repeated, 309D. So it's scattered in 3 different places. What this sweet group of sections does is it eliminates the language from section 10B, it repeals outright section 309D, and it combines it all together in section 27 in a brand new chapter in Title 19 on complete streets, and then it expands the requirements slightly related to some sort of introductory language with a policy for the state surrounding complete streets, a definition of complete streets, and then increased transparency with respect to what needs to be incorporated into the written report if complete streets principles are not going to be incorporated. So it looks like a lot more than it actually is, because a lot of what the language is doing is consolidating everything into one place, which I think it makes it easier to see what the state's approach is to complete streets. So now let's talk about where that's done.
Well, now we have an annual report telling us, tell us how complete street policy.
And this section 2401, is that, I look for just a definition of complete streets, a new definition from the areas?
It's sort of a new definition. So if you look at what's being struck on lines 11 to 13 are principles of safety and accommodation of all transportation system users, regardless of age, ability, or modal preference. The definition is, as used in this chapter, complete streets means streets that provide safe and accessible options for multiple travel modes for individuals of all ages, abilities, including walking, cycling, public transportation, and motor vehicles. I would say it's pretty similar to what.
And is this language that the House designed, or does it come from somewhere else?
So this language was worked on.
When I mean this language.
Yeah. So all of the complete streets language was worked on extensively by AARP. They had a report that was done by, I think it was Smart Growth America, related to Vermont's complete streets language.
That when we first did it, or are you talking about
Recently? This was done in November of last year, November of 2022. There was a much more extensive rewrite of the complete streets language in H101, which was a bill that was introduced in the House. What you have here is a bit of a compromise negotiation between AARP and the Agency of Transportation, predominantly with the league weighing in a little bit just to say that address the municipal piece. And maybe it would be helpful to hear from Michelle on sort of the agency's involvement and what you see in this bill.
So we worked very closely with Kelly Stoddard of AARP, and we arrived at this language. It's not everything I think that they would have liked, but it is operational for us, and so we're fine with the language as presented.
Okay.
And the rewriting of what they were, the complete street.
Vermont state standards.
That's addressed in a later section.
Yeah, so what I will say is we just barely have updated our complete streets standards and their guidance, it's not standards, guidance. And we finished the sort of internal review of it, and then we're working to do some external partner engagement this spring and early summer. And the complete streets guidance will inform and fold in with the state standards effort as we move forward as well.
I think you don't have to do the standards before you can do it together. Graded service.
Needed services.
I think one thing that might sort of be helpful for the committee is to look at the requirements around what happens if a project doesn't incorporate complete streets principles. This is very similar to existing law in 19 VSA section 10B and section 309D. It's new section 2403. It's going to be on page 49, starting at line 9. Subsection A is state projects, subsection B is municipal projects. It's the same circumstances that need to be considered. It's just written differently because it's who is responsible for it. So for a state managed project, and this is only on paved roads, that's expressed earlier in the language, the state managed project needs to incorporate complete streets principles unless the project manager makes a written determination. For municipalities, it's the municipality makes the written determination. It needs to be supported by documentation that one or more of the following circumstances exist. These circumstances are basically the existing circumstances. Use of the transportation facility by pedestrians, bicyclists, or others is prohibited by law, like the interstate. Subdivision 2, the cost of incorporating complete streets principles is disproportionate to the need or probable use. And the balance of that is existing law. What's new is the last part, where if the project manager bases the written determination required under the subsection in whole or in part on the disproportionate piece, there needs to be a supplemental written determination with specific details on costs, needs, and probable uses. One of the things that there was a lot of back and forth on in working on this language was whether or not there should be a qualifier added before disproportionate, such as grossly or excessively. And this was, I think, a point of compromise in keep it at disproportionate, but require additional information on that determination. And then in the third circumstance that would require sort of be the out for incorporating complete streets principles is the reference to the agency's complete streets guidance.
So really all they're asking for is documentation of how that determination.
For that middle one, yes.
Yeah.
But
You don't
it's,
need documentation now.
Yes, we do. This is further clarifying how much and what they want for documentation. This goes a little beyond the documentation we produce now.
You have those out there, Burlington's big on complete street.
You have some down Wilson Road.
Oh, do you?
So are complete street principles defined?
um,
So when they say a project shall incorporate
Yeah,
complete
they-
principles, what are those in relation to what the definition of complete streets is?
Completely marked lane for pedestrian and bicyclists.
Yeah, they mark it.
I would think it's like that, but is it?
so complete streets is not defined, but I think it is sort of defined. It's not defined in
Principles.
this
Complete
chapter.
streets.
Complete streets is defined. Complete streets principles is not defined. But if you look at the state policy section 2402, it starts on line 10 on the prior page, page 48. I would say that is encapsulating
I think so.
what the complete streets principles are. I think if you are concerned that there is ambiguity as to whether or not the complete streets principles are captured in the state policy section, I think you could modify that section to use the phrase complete streets principles. It's not defined in current statute either, and I don't think there is confusion as to what complete streets principles are. I also think it's something that's probably addressed in your guidance document.
Well, if they talk about will be defined in the guidance. So above the projects not incorporating on page 49 has these to incorporate complete street principles that and has 3 examples of principles, but assume there are others. And then the state of the practice design guidance, is that the guidance, is it the complete street guidance that you're working on?
So this is part of the policy language.
What line are you on?
Page 49 lines like 3 to 8.
So this is defining out what the policy is. and then it lists 3 things. But what it's tough, I wasn't sure about what, if that state of the practice design guidance is the complete streets design guidance.
That's it is. If you like a presentation on it, that might be the existing.
And that's being written together with the other thing, the design standards for all roads.
It's written now, it's gonna be implemented soon.
Oh, that's, you're going out to public comment.
Yeah, we're gonna like get stakeholder input on it and then we're gonna implement it ASAP. And then the Vermont State Standards is a 2-year process.
And that's what that's contractor. Do we need to say it's complete streets design standards?
I don't think it's a design standard. I think there's a different term for it. And
I guess if it's a complete street principle, the state of the practice design guidance would be design guidance for complete streets.
Well, I think so. The
It's
complete
broader
streets
than that.
principles need to follow state of the practice design guidance. And I think, as Senator Kitchell just said, it's broader than just
Of all,
complete
just
streets.
design of roadways.
Right.
Transportation infrastructure.
And I think, in some ways inherent, we're defining principles by saying they gotta serve individuals, they gotta follow practice and are sensitive. I mean, seems like that's fairly descriptive of what those principles should reflect.
Okay.
I think we should declare a victory on this. If you were, it's cleaning it up and it's, you're gonna be doing a lot of work on this anyway. I just think back to what Kevin Marshy was saying 20 years ago when he was designing roadways. They weren't thinking about bike ped. And so much of the practice and just what is inherent in the work and the design today is so different.
and there's gonna be a database.
So before we close it out, section 2404, that's the section on annual report and public database. So there's an annual report that would start in 2025. It needs to detail the state's efforts in following the complete streets policy in 2402 during the previous fiscal year. And then they need to start maintaining a public database for projects that have been bid after January 1, 2023. It's going to need to include a description of the project, the location of the project, which complete streets principles were incorporated in the project as they are applicable, and an explanation as to what circumstances had it so that they didn't need to incorporate complete streets principles. And the database needs to be updated on at least an annual basis. So that's getting at more of the transparency, reporting back, more information
Another
being
report.
Do we
available.
need to do the report if we're telling them to post all this data to the website?
The report, so it's a policy decision whether or not you need the report, but the report is gonna sort of be necessitated where it's providing, detailing the state's efforts. I think that would be a bit more summary in nature of what's included in the database, and it might be easier for people to process than like going and looking at a database
I
that's
don't
just
even call it
by
a
project.
database, it's almost just an inventory of project. When I'm reading this is not how I think of a database, a web page that gives you information. Actually, it'd be just as easy to incorporate it into your fact book and annual report.
It might be a huge number of pages, because every project we would be working on would have either we did something on complete streets and here's what we did, or we didn't and here's why not. So it could be a thick section. I'm not saying we
You
couldn't
have to do it project by project then?
So we apply complete streets through the
No,
design
okay.
phase.
Oh, it says.
And for the public database, they would need to.
Yeah, it says all state managed transportation projects.
If you think it's not a database, you could certainly change it to just be like project inventory.
Well, something, I don't consider this a database, frankly.
Definition of database in this section. I agree, this is somewhat vague, but it could be a database and there's some more context. It looks like.
So would you like
Post on
to?
the agency website.
Made available to the public.
Yeah.
Well, so
Maybe you could just say a report on the state's efforts, like I don't know how much detail. We will have all the details if we want them, but
So they're already required under 2403D to post the determination. So those are the, when we didn't incorporate complete streets principles on a web page. You could modify what subsection B in 2404 to sort of not reference database. And I don't even know if we use database after the subsection heading.
yeah, and one, website, a database of all state managed transportation. On page 52.
So do you want to say an
A web page
inventory of
database.
or information on? The agency shall post a webpage dedicated to complete streets on the agency's website, information on all state managed transportation projects.
If they want to use a database to do that, that's up to them.
That's right.
Be a table.
It could be a table. It could be just an inventory. I don't know. It could be a project inventory.
I mean, I guess if it's a database, then people could search it, or, I don't know how many, if all projects are in there, then you do want a database, if you get projects.
It would have to be a searchable thing, so you could
Yeah.
search it by your town or your county.
Yeah, so you kinda do want it.
That sort of thing, so.
Okay, so and then change in the heading on line 21,
I think
public
I
inventory.
think database is good, because I think if it's gonna have hundreds of units, we do want database, because you want it searchable and.
All right, searchable database.
Okay, so do we want to just leave it at
Keep
a
it.
database?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
You're okay with it.
I'm fine.
She doesn't care either. We're worn
She doesn't
down.
have-
You wearing me down here.
Okay, and then 29, it just says that the date, section 29.
This is basically transparency and accountability that you are actually complying with the law when you do the projects. And
Well,
there's a sense of when the principles just can't be accommodated because of I'm just thinking about certain sections of road that are crammed between a body of water and a hill or a cliff or whatever, so.
and I think it also provides the opportunity for municipal staff or advocates or others who may be wanting to understand, like, what have we done for complete streets in the town of Georgia or whatever? Have we done anything, or what's going on with this project? So I think it's a useful tool.
And it also would say that it is sort of an expansion on what's in session law, which requires that those written determinations be made available to the public, but doesn't really sort of make that as known or have it required to be in this central location.
They're on our website.
So they're following session law, which is going to be
It's not a
pretty similar to
database.
codified law.
Well, this isn't written to say it's searchable
Or web accessible.
or accessible.
All of our web pages are accessible according to ADA standards, but I would say searchable is a good term to use, perhaps.
Do you want to require that it be searchable or let the agency?
No, I don't want to,
decide?
I don't want to be prescriptive, but I think in order to get much utility, you really do have to design it that way. Otherwise, you'd be going through, I don't know how many projects.
And that's how our project databases are set up, which is where I would imagine there would be a field included in some part of our project management database where the developer, the engineer would be entering this information, and we would just be extracting it along with the town name, the project number, and other things like that.
Okay, so I think that's a good segue to section 30, as Michelle mentioned municipalities. Section 30 requires the Agency of Transportation to consult with the league to design and implement a program to provide training on complete streets to municipalities. And then section 31 is pretty much an extension of what you included in the TIBA last year, which told them to come up with a plan for updating the state standards. And in subsection B, it's saying continue doing that. And then in subsection B, it's saying provide an oral update on the process to replace the current Vermont state standards and related documents on or before February 15th, 2024. And that is an oral update, it is not a written report.
So, municipalities and neighborhoods, for the complete streets law, we're actually the extent to which we are imposing certain design requirements on villages.
So if it's a paved road,
But it might not be a state, and it's not one of the, under the state,
oh, you're talking about like class 1 town highways?
I'm talking, well, no, I'm talking about, just plain neighborhoods like Spring Street,
Yeah.
you know, Summer Street, et
Yeah.
cetera. And they're not state managed, which is what we're talking about above.
Subsection B up above does talk about municipally managed though, and that's consistent with 19 VSA section 309D.
well,
So that's
that's what-
existing law.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. So what we're trying to do is help the municipalities understand what those design
yes.
require. I'm just trying to
Yes. Why
understand.
are we
what-
training them?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then to comply with
Mhm.
the law.
Yeah, to comply with the law, to make sure that they and their engineers, understand, the consultant community, et cetera, understand, what the objectives are in statute that we are trying to achieve, what our guidance document is trying to achieve, and then this will tie into the Vermont state standards as well.
And I will say that this is sort of subtle, and I talked to Gwen from the league about this, because she was just like, am I missing something? Because it's really just repealing 19 VSA section 309D, which has these requirements for municipalities, and putting it in this chapter on complete streets. But it's not suddenly taking the requirements in those 3 circumstances for when you don't need to follow complete streets principles and putting that on municipalities. That is existing law that for their municipally managed projects, they need to
So they
follow
don't have
complete
to do
streets
that.
principles.
Documentation of.
They do need to do the documentation, and for years, we've asked the regional planning commissions through the Transportation Planning Initiative to collect the documentation from the municipalities with mixed results.
And the database does not require the agency to collect that information or for it to go in the database.
Horrendous to all those. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
when you think about the thousands of
Of projects, yeah.
projects that could entail.
So subsection D does require the written determinations from the municipality to be posted to the municipality's website, but it doesn't require the agency to also be the keeper of them. And it will be interesting to see if municipalities post them.
Well, so we don't even know what they
As soon as they
are.
have a website.
Well, and the training can tell them to do that.
Huh,
Okay, so that's the end of complete streets. I don't,
yeah, that could be very interesting because a lot of villages don't have sidewalks.
Sidewalks, right.
And so if we're talking about that to complete streets, obviously, say pedestrian, are we, to what extent would the,
It's not a mandate to create a complete street. It's basically saying, if you are, so this is like what happens with the agency. So say you're in the town of Danville and the town has decided they're gonna repave, Park Street. And that Park Street currently doesn't have a sidewalk. And they're only gonna be putting, a skim coat on or whatever, or not a full depth reconstruction. So it's not like they're creating sort of a new alignment on the roadway in terms of really getting in there and digging things up. And that, if they really digging things up, they need to have a sidewalk, they need to account for the bicyclists. Or say why they couldn't, like maybe it's cost prohibitive, although it would have to be not grossly, but
there would need to be these supplemental written determinations.
Yes. So basically, it's like every time you're thinking about doing a street improvement, you need to be understanding if you could possibly include a complete streets element in it, that you do so.
I'm just thinking in Danville, there are very few side streets that have sidewalks.
Most
And which is not unique to,
No, and I don't think every, depending on the, traffic volumes, on the pedestrian traffic volumes, like not every street needs to be a complete street. It's really, you're looking to have those in the environment where they're really needed.
So what I put up on the screen, this is what would be repealed. This is the current requirement for municipalities for complete streets. And under the
It is municipally managed be hyphenated.
not when it ends in ly. I ask that editors that all the time when it's state hyphen municipally, not hyphen managed.
Okay, thank you. I just thought I would check that out.
They have like a 15-page guidance document on when you use hyphens.
I see.
Um,
Normally municipally is describing managed and you would hyphenate, but not,
Well, actually, wait, let me check to see if they hyphenated in this. Maybe there's a sub rule when there's multiple.
No.
Nope, they didn't hyphenate it in this.
Municipality managed, then it would be hyphenated.
yeah, it would
I
make
think so. Because it doesn't have the OIPs.
Municipality.
So under current law for the municipalities, if after the consideration required under the section, a project does not incorporate complete streets principles, the municipality managing the project shall make a written determination supported by documentation, all consistent and available for public inspection at the office of the municipal clerk and at the agency of transportation. So that's probably why there's frustration with gathering them. But if you wanted to not require the website posting, you could change the language that's being codified to say, instead of them posting it to a website, they need to make it available for public inspection and then not reincorporate this language that requires the agency of the transportation to be the collector of the written determinations.
I think that's,
Okay, so what I'm gonna do then, it sounds like, is in the language that says posting of determinations, I'm gonna change it to just determinations for the subsection heading. The written determination is required by subsection A and B of the section shall be available for inspection, and I'll track the rest of the language with the municipal clerk. In the case of a municipally managed project and posted to a web page for the Agency of Transportation's website, in the case of a state managed project. So you'll maintain the made available approach. You'll take the agency out of being the collector and keeper of the municipal determinations, and you'll require all of the agency for state managed project determinations to be posted, and then that keys into the database that they will create that's required under the next section that only addresses the state managed projects. And we'll make that change in your next draft.
Okay, would the committee would like to have enough this morning? Is that what it's done?
You are so close to being done.
Okay.
I know it doesn't seem like it.
Okay, I didn't know, because there's quite a few pages here.
oh,
So there's one more substantive section, and then I'm gonna summarize all of the fee sections in one sentence and tell you that
Wow.
Chris can give you more information.
Okay,
I like putting in the database in section 35. Maintenance and database. This is just driving people to take Senator Chitten's database class.
Okay, so section 32, this requires a survey to be done by the Agency of Transportation in partnership with regional planning commissions
on the Route 5.
on Route 5. It's not requiring
I know.
cost estimates, it's just solicitation of interest. Survey shall address level of interest of the municipalities, including considerations of the costs and the benefits to tourism. And then that comes back to the House and Senate Committees on Transportation on or before January 15th of 2024.
How much does this cost?
Nothing, they've got to do the survey. But, yeah, but how would they determine, how would a survey determine the costs and the benefits? I mean, that's a fairly complicated, I can't imagine it would be how many millions of dollars to build it, but.
It's addressing the level of interest including the consideration of the cost. So I don't think it actually requires there to be a determination of
I
it.
just know we have a left and right hand side of the brain problem here, and that is, I want it, but it shouldn't cost anything. And I understand that, but it seems like,
It's kind of like the start of other projects, including the Valley Rail. So like you just like, well, what's the interest or
No,
can it be done?
I know, well, the interest is more on the sort of abandoned rail trail from St. J over to New Hampshire, but well, obviously you said the RPCs will do this.
Yeah, I guess I spent quite a bit of time with the legislators of the Route 5 corridor who brought this forward. And they had not they had derived this idea on their own. They hadn't necessarily consulted with communities that they thought it would be a good idea. And I explained that how these kinds of projects develop is from the ground up, and that the best way forward would be, rather than putting something like this in statute, would be for all of them to communicate with their regional planning commissions, call a meeting, get them all together. I actually even contacted all those the regional planning commissions, and put them in touch with these legislators. I feel like we're getting on the slippery slope of the prioritization process and the underlying planning process that we have for transportation projects, coming in as a top-down directive to communities versus a bottom-up interest from communities. And I made that clear to the committee that, this was compromise language, like, all right,
Because there was a bill introduced.
there was a bill introduced, and there was, much more strident language relative to the scoping study, and so anyways, this is where they got to. We can do this. I'm not terribly supportive because of the principle, precedent it sets.
But yeah, I agree. I think Cross Vermont Trails was all local initiative. It didn't come from the plan at all.
LVRT, that was all of us getting together at the regional plan.
No, actually, it was by the trail to begin with.
Right, but we had to lobby the agency and then the legislature to buy the trail. So that's where that original.
I thought Howard Dean probably was, I think maybe pushing the agency at the time, right? Because you were there when that was done, and it was not necessarily universally applauded.
Oh, to buy the
Actually,
the railroad, not the trail, the railroad.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
I would agree.
The rail bed,
Yes, that's a different scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's what I'm talking about.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
For the state to acquire that rail bed.
Yeah, and I think there's precedent for infrastructure like a railroad that is kind of a different operating function and how it connects to interstate commerce. And we have a state rail plan that looks at, I don't know that Governor Dean's purchase decisions were based on the state rail plan, but one would hope that if there is a resource like this CSX owned, that's not for sale, but the CSX owned property, that we would have already identified it in a state plan that this is an important priority for the rail network. That's like more, I could see that not being like a locally driven thing, like a multi-community.
Oh, well, that's fairly locally driven right now.
Yes, because the state already understands that the property owner is not interested in doing anything of that nature.
So the RPCs are willing to do
Yeah,
this.
they're willing to do it.
It's fine.
Okay.
It's a long corridor, certainly, from
And I think that's the potential, like if you were able to make that.
doing it in segments,
Yeah, it would take years and years, but then it's like the Cross Vermont Trail or something.
was done in segments as
People
well.
like the idea of making it.
Okay, so 3 small things, so technical nature. Under current law, there is a chapter, 19 VSA, chapter 26, subchapter 2, that gives the agency the authority to enter into defined public-private partnerships. They have not done that yet, but they might. That is set to repeal on July 1 of 2023. This would extend the repeal to July 1 of 2026. The agency originally suggested outright repealing the sunset, so allowing it to continue forever, having it not be a pilot program. This was where the House landed, was extended by 3 years.
If we think it's a good idea, what, I just don't think the sunset, but fine, let it go. I mean, it's been very good for commerce where we've actually had a siding, and it's been done certainly for maybe lumber, certainly grain, where you have a business where that siding is helpful, and it's authorization for this three-way partnership.
Well, the three-way is actually already, we can do that without this language. This language was really more like, you have a private developer that comes in and wants to build a large housing project, say. And it's going to require some sort of extensive upgrade to the state highway system that we don't have programmed.
So I'm thinking more of the rail, but.
Yeah, the rail is that's the best example, or, you know, a rest area type facility that is off the interstate that is like a welcome center is another good example where we might like
You do that in
partially
Berlin.
something like Berlin might partially participate financially because it's in the best interest of the traveling public, but yeah. So we went through and we developed, you know, the whole program to do these P3s. So we've put a lot of time into it. Nothing has come forward yet that's needed this, but that's not to say going forward we may not have something. So we feel like since we already invested in it, it makes sense to.
I would suggest that if you keep it, to amend the chapter slightly, because it keeps saying like pilot program, and there's like some legislative intent language about how it will go away, but I certainly could draft that up to make it seem more like it's a permanent addition to codified law if the desire of the committee is to not extend the sunset.
Well,
Do you want to noodle on that one?
just let it go.
Okay, and last two, section 34, these are repeals of either obsolete language that's been preempted by federal law in the case of subsection A, and giving the Transportation Board the authority to determine passenger train schedules, and in subsection B, language that should have been repealed last year when you moved the covered bridge restriction language from Title 19 to Title 23. And what's covered in 19 VSA section 314 is now either in Title 23 or Title 24. So it is also obsolete language. And then, since it seems like you're probably okay with these repeals, the balance of the bill, except for the effective dates, which are almost all July 1, 2023, is the fee language that was added in the House Ways and Means Amendment. It increases all of the DMV fees that were last increased in 2016 by an inflator that's 19.8%. They're all in a chart. They're all addressed in the fiscal note. I do not think you want me to walk through the language that strikes out.
They all apply the same percentage.
Yes. And Chris has this great chart that will show you what the current one is, what the increased one is.
I know we're almost out of time, but just it's on section 34, I would just love further elaboration on these repeals and confirmation, because you are certain that there's in the section by section, you'll show where the board can. I don't know what the implications are of eliminating the ability to manage passenger trains.
They don't currently have the ability to. It's preempted by federal law.
But you're going to do a section by section to better clarify that.
And the other repeal is getting rid of redundant, sort of hanging language that had already been incorporated in other
If I have to
sections.
present that, I have more questions.
Okay.
Just cleaning up the
What
statute.
I will do is I will send you the information that was provided to me by the Agency of Transportation when they picked up on that. And they suggested that this was something that should go in the technical corrections bill, and I thought it was a little bit more than just a technical correction, which is why it's here. But I will send that to you, because they really have,
Well, that's if I present it, but I don't have to do that either.
I will send that to all of you, you might find it interesting.
Oh, I think it's yours. It's got your name on it.
You now know more about it. So, but you talked about a list, but it's really just these, there's more than there on these 2 pages.
You only have 2 pages of fees?
You don't have the new version.
Yeah, the new version has it has 150 pages.
It keeps going.
55 through.
It's page 55 through 96.
And then there's more text.
More text, more numbers struck
I was
out,
just
more
looking at
text.
this list.
Yeah, it is the last, it runs from page 55, section 36 to page, it's either 96 or 97 in section 70,
So what is it, 19%, 18 points?
19.8%.
I just, like I said before, whether you agree or disagree with these, it should not be a transportation bill.
And I'm willing to put them in the budget. They come out of the bill, but obviously the fees are gonna be revenue to deal with your structural deficit, to be honest, even for the FHWA match. And that's the issue is,
Yes, go ahead,
the
Chris.
one day.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to respond to Senator Perchlik's question. Yeah, the 19.8% ties to an inflationary escalator on the personal consumption expenditure index that the Fed's put out from July of 2016 through December of 2022. So this is all spelled out in the fiscal note, but we looked at numerous inflation indexes. We looked at the CPI, we looked at the Federal Highway Administration's construction cost index and a few others. This one, the personal consumption expenditure index, was the lowest value out of all 5 of those. For consistent with past practice, that 19.8 was applied to the current fee, rounded up to the nearest whole dollar. So DMV is not parsing really. Yeah, exactly. There were a few exceptions where there wasn't rounding involved, and that had to do with the truck fees and the bus fees because they're weight based. So you know, it's the weight of your vehicle times that fee results in what you end up paying. So in the past, those had not been rounded off. So we did not round them off again here. And the fees that were adjusted are the ones that primarily accrue to the T fund. So not motor boats and things like that. They're the ones that primarily accrue to the T fund. They're the ones that had not been adjusted since July of 2016.
What's the registration, is that the biggest factor of revenue, is registration of cars? And there's a lot of fees.
Registration, Mr. Chair, you're exactly right. Registrations for vehicles, licenses, those are the biggest sources of
What's
revenue.
registration alone, like, let's just, for example, if registration was not included, I just try to get some information. I have any idea.
I do have an idea, and I can find it right now. So if you're looking just for pleasure car registrations, the 1 year, the 2 year, the 1 year registration would bring in 5 million of additional revenue, and the 2 year, 2.8 million. So between the two of those, that's 7.8 million of the 20 million from fees.
There's a lot of different fees, and I'm just wondering, I know, like I said.
So it's the biggest chunk.
Okay, the vast majority of the lines on the spreadsheet don't bring in a lot of money. Most of the money comes from your vehicle registrations, the driver's licenses, or inspection stickers.
Doesn't affect everyone, because they're small.
Yeah, the most payers,
That's right.
The, like multiple registrations, that kind of stuff.
yeah, and then there's some things on the fee list that are so obscure that
Yeah.
they're very historic or very, very few are transacted.
The
But
big thing that jumps up is the car registration. I think that's a big factor with people. But like on TV last night, they had the person there explaining, and I think that's one of the biggest factors, is because that, they can relate to that 20% increase. And it's our fault, we haven't done it for 6 years, I understand that. But also the other fees, you don't run across them that often, they're nickel and dime. couple bucks or something. Registration is the big, I think registration is the big number that jumps out, and grabs everybody.
And did the House talk at all about phasing it? This was done in Ways and Means.
So in Ways and Means, these sections are effective in this version of the bill on January 1 of 2024. So they would take effect partway through the fiscal year. And there's written correspondence as to why that was preferred-ish over July 1 of 2023. Senator Kitchell, if you're going to move this language into the big bill, the one thing I'm going to flag for you is section 70, which amends the gross weight limits on highways.
Well, if we did that, you see, it keeps the T-bill, the plan intact and moves it forward.
Well, will it be voted on separate on the floor?
Yeah, in the budget, you can,
But the budget, will it be separated from the budget?
no, it'll be included in the budget. You could vote to separate the issue. If you voted down the fees, then it will have an impact, obviously, on,
Right.
because part of what we would be able to do with the partial year fees, and we would, you would still need general fund.
Well, why
The match.
was it never an issue in the House? What happened in the House that this money got shorted when it got to the Senate? That's my question. Did they spend it elsewhere or something? Because when the bill was first introduced in the House, we didn't require $21 million in fees.
So there's
What the House did is say they did not agree with the governor's use of using general
Okay,
fund
so
money.
They spent money elsewhere.
They did,
Okay,
that's true.
okay.
And
So
Their spending bill is a lot bigger than your spending bill would have been. The Senate.
I don't know exactly what, even to make this IIJA work, the House didn't reserve any of that. What we have is some higher revenues because we still got the tail of those federal impact on revenues to the state. So there were two pieces, one of which is making sure that we have the match to draw down the IIJ money. And that is in both transportation and in water sewer infrastructure. And the House didn't allocate any money for the match. So there are two different things, one of which is using one-time general fund to make up or to provide the match for base transportation activities. So you've got a problem with revenues not being sufficient to match your normal operation. And then secondly, you have the match that's necessary to draw down these additional federal dollars that flow from the IIJA. The House did not even allocate any of the money to be the match.
So they must have spent a lot of money on different programs that we haven't okayed yet.
That's right.
So if they got paid family leave, don't they have paid leave and everything else in there?
They do, and I don't know how they've used the one-time money, but
That's what
we're,
I'm saying, that's important, how they use, if they spend it, it may not be what you want to spend it on.
it may not. I believe if we in the Senate want to put in money to be the match, we've got to dedicate some general fund to the transportation. But you've still got the fundamental problem that the revenues into the T fund are now not even sufficient to draw down the normal federal highway money. And that's why the proposal calls using one-time general fund to serve as the
Right.
match for those base
They chose
ongoing.
not to do that, the House.
The House chose not to do any of it, I think. No, they did fund the first year.
they did the
of
10.9 million.
to draw down the FHWA money.
So what I was gonna say to you was way less interesting. It was a technical comment that section 70 deals with what is in S99, the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill, with the milk permit language. And I think you should pick one bill to deal with it, so it's not being amended in contradictory ways in the two different bills. So I think you should not include section 70 in the big bill, and instead I will reflect the increase in the fee, but also the elimination of the $10 milk permit fee in S99 in the House, but I think that's something that you should convey to the House. And Chris and I can put this in a little email to you.
Well, I can do that, but of course, this is still gotta go to finance, because anything with fees has got to go through finance.
Well, it is interesting, if you take this out of the T-bill, if the amendment takes it out, I wonder if,
Well, knowledge-based user fee language might be the hook again.
but that was the hook in the House when they were looking for a hook, I don't know. Secretary
mind
Blue
if you
would
do
You
refer.
it.
can't take it out and put it in budget here.
No.
No,
We'd have to do that on the floor.
I
So
think-
what you're gonna, your moving pieces are is your strike all amendment or a section by section amendment, whatever it ends up being, instances of amendment, is gonna delete from this bill sections 36 or whatever it was to 76.
The underlying bill has fees, so it has to go through,
I don't know. That's a
Anything that
question.
has a fee, even,
even if we strike it out. Because it came over with a fee. So if our amendment isn't accepted, then the fees would be in.
And it still, as Chris mentioned, has the mileage-based user fee piece, so it might have gone to Senate Finance no matter what.
The bill separate. Yes.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Not that I don't want to visit Senate Finance, but,
You can spend more time with Senator too.
I feel like, we're not actually proposing to raise a fee with the mileage-based user fee in this biennium or in this
Just studying it.
session. We're just studying it. And I think it would be important for them to understand what's coming, like we did in the House. But would it technically need to go there if we're not raising the
So-
fee?
I'm gonna again say this is a Secretary Bloomer question and President Pro Tem question that I am not
And you don't
gonna
need
wade
to-
in on
you don't need to
answering.
ask. I mean, we're
if
happy
there's
to-
a fee in the underlying bill, even if it gets struck, it will still go to finance.
I was just saying, because we don't have an actual fee yet, we have studied for a fee, does it have to go? to-
I think what Senator Kitchell is saying is because it has all the fee language in it now as it came over for the House.
Oh, yeah.
She thinks
yeah.
Senate Secretary Bloomer is gonna.
These things separate.
No, what Senator Kitchell is saying, to paraphrase this, even if this committee gets rid of it, he might still refer it to Senate Finance.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Thank
Yeah.
you for that
In the
procedural
underlying,
understanding.
yes.
Thank you.
So we got a number of bills referred, even though the bill is introduced, had a fee or something, and it's removed by the committee before it's voted out, that because the underlying bill had it, it will still come to us.